The family I babysit for has a safe room in the basement, and last week we had to use it. I started babysitting for the Caldwell family in September after answering an ad that paid almost double what other families in the neighborhood offered. The posting had been oddly specific about requirements: background check mandatory, references from at least 3 families, CPR certified, and available for emergency overnight stays with less than an hour notice. Most babysitting jobs didn't read like applications for a security clearance, but the money was too good to pass up and I needed to pay off my student loans. When I met Catherine Caldwell for the first time at a coffee shop downtown, she spent the first 30 minutes asking me questions that had nothing to do with childcare. How did I handle high-pressure situations? Had I ever had to make a split-second decision that affected someone's safety? Did I have any family history of substance abuse or mental illness? I answered honestly while wondering what kind of household needed a babysitter with crisis management skills. Catherine was in her late 30s, dressed in expensive but understated clothes, with the kind of carefully controlled demeanor that suggested she was used to managing stress. She explained that her husband Dominic worked in financial consulting and traveled frequently for work, sometimes internationally for weeks at a time. They had 2 kids, 10-year-old Finn and 7-year-old Iris, both bright and well-behaved according to their mother. The family had just moved to the area 6 months ago for Dominic's job, and they were still getting settled. Catherine said she worked from home doing something vague with data analysis and needed someone reliable who could handle the kids after school and some evenings. Everything sounded normal enough until she mentioned the house had some unusual security features I'd need to learn. She said it casually, like she was mentioning they had a tricky garage door opener, but something in her tone made my stomach tighten. I asked what she meant by security features, and she smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. She said we'd go over everything during my first day. The Caldwell house was in one of those new developments where every home looked vaguely the same, large and modern with perfect landscaping and 3-car garages. From the outside, it seemed completely ordinary, the kind of place where families barbecued on weekends and kids rode bikes in circles. But when Catherine gave me the tour on my first day, I started noticing things that weren't normal. Every window had sensors that beeped if you opened them more than 6 inches. There were cameras in every room except the bathrooms and bedrooms, though Catherine assured me they were only checked if there was a problem. The front and back doors had biometric locks that required a fingerprint scan, and Catherine programmed mine into the system while explaining that only 4 people had access: her, Dominic, me, and their previous babysitter who'd moved away last month. The kids didn't have access codes, which seemed strange until Catherine explained they were working on teaching them responsible security practices first. Finn and Iris were quiet kids who seemed older than their ages in the way they carried themselves. Finn had dark hair and his mother's careful way of watching everything before speaking. Iris was small for 7 with blonde braids and a habit of chewing her bottom lip when she was thinking. Both of them were polite almost to a fault, saying please and thank you for everything, and asking permission before touching anything. On that first afternoon, I made them snacks and helped with homework while Catherine worked in her upstairs office. Everything felt normal until Iris knocked over her juice and immediately burst into tears, apologizing over and over like she'd committed a serious crime instead of a minor accident. I cleaned it up and told her it was fine. Accidents happened, but she kept apologizing until Finn put his hand on her shoulder and whispered something I couldn't hear. After that, she calmed down, but I noticed both kids were extremely careful about not making messes or loud noises for the rest of the afternoon. At the end of that first day, Catherine called me into the kitchen and said there was one more thing she needed to show me. She led me down to the basement, which had been finished into a nice recreation room with a TV and some old furniture. But instead of stopping there, she walked to what looked like a regular wall panel next to the water heater. She pressed her palm against it, and a hidden door clicked open, revealing a small room about 8 feet by 10 feet. Inside were 2 twin beds, shelves stocked with bottled water and non-perishable food, a first aid kit, a bucket with a lid, and a landline phone mounted on the wall. There was also a tablet showing camera feeds from around the house and a heavy deadbolt on the inside of the door. Catherine said this was the safe room, and if I ever needed to use it, I should take the kids down here immediately and lock the door from the inside. The phone connected directly to a private security company that worked with their family, not 911. She made me practice opening the door 3 times until I could do it quickly. I asked what scenario would require us to use a safe room, and Catherine's expression went carefully blank. She said they'd had some security concerns at Dominic's previous job. Nothing specific I needed to worry about, but they believed in being prepared. The way she said it made it clear she wasn't going to provide more details. She made me memorize the entry code for the safe room door, 4 digits that spelled out SAFE on a phone keypad. Then she showed me how to check that the cameras were working and explained that if anything felt wrong, even if I couldn't articulate why, I should trust my instincts and take the kids to the basement. She'd rather have a false alarm than take chances with her children's safety. I left that evening feeling unsettled but telling myself that some people were just extra cautious. Maybe Dominic worked with sensitive financial information, and they'd received threats from disgruntled clients. Maybe Catherine had anxiety and needed the security measures to feel safe. I didn't let myself think too hard about what kind of threat would require a hidden safe room. Over the next few months, I fell into a routine with the Caldwell family. I was there Monday through Thursday from 3 until 8, and occasional weekends when Catherine had work deadlines. The kids warmed up to me slowly, and I learned that Finn loved astronomy and could name every constellation visible from our latitude. Iris was obsessed with marine biology and checked out massive books about ocean ecosystems from the library. Both of them were homeschooled until this year and still adjusting to regular school, which explained some of their social awkwardness. They didn't have many friends and seemed content with each other's company, playing elaborate imaginary games in the backyard where Finn was always a space explorer and Iris was always a deep-sea scientist. I never went back down to the safe room after that first day, and after a while, I almost forgot it existed. The security cameras and fingerprint locks just became part of the background, no stranger than any other household quirks. Dominic came home from his trips every few weeks, and I only met him a handful of times. He was tall and thin with graying hair, and the distracted air of someone whose mind was always somewhere else. He was polite to me but never chatty, usually disappearing into his home office within minutes of arriving. The kids lit up when he was home, following him around and telling him about school, but he always seemed vaguely uncomfortable with their attention, like he didn't quite know what to do with it. Catherine became more relaxed when he was there, some of the tightness leaving her shoulders, but she also watched him constantly like she was monitoring his mood. One evening when I was leaving and Dominic had just gotten back from a trip, I overheard them arguing in the kitchen. Catherine's voice was low but sharp, saying something about promises he'd made and timelines that weren't being met. Dominic responded that he was handling it and she needed to trust him. I left quickly before they realized I could hear them. The Thursday everything changed started like any other day. I picked up the kids from school at 3:15, and we stopped at the library so Iris could return her ocean books and get new ones. Finn wanted to check out a book about black holes that was way above his reading level, but I let him get it anyway. We got home around 4, and I made them apple slices with peanut butter while they did homework at the kitchen table. Catherine was upstairs on a video call, her office door closed. Everything was completely normal until around 5:30 when both kids suddenly went quiet and looked toward the front door. I hadn't heard anything, but they were both frozen with their pencils hovering over their worksheets. Then I heard it too, a car pulling into the driveway, which wasn't unusual except Catherine wasn't expecting anyone, and Dominic wasn't due home for another week. I walked to the front window and saw a black SUV with tinted windows parked behind Catherine's car. 2 men in suits were getting out, and something about the way they moved made my pulse quicken. The doorbell rang, and I checked the camera feed on the tablet by the door. The 2 men were standing on the porch, both wearing sunglasses even though the sun was setting. One of them held up a badge to the camera and said they were federal agents needing to speak with Dominic Caldwell. My mouth went dry because something about this felt wrong, but I couldn't articulate what. I called up to Catherine, and her office door opened immediately. She came down the stairs fast, looked at the camera feed, and her face went completely white. She grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise and said one word: basement. I started to ask what was happening, but she cut me off, saying there was no time to explain and I needed to get the kids to the safe room right now. Her voice had an edge of panic that made me move without thinking. I grabbed Finn and Iris by their hands and pulled them toward the basement stairs while Catherine went to the front door. Behind me, I heard her telling the men through the intercom that she needed to see proper identification and a warrant. The kids didn't ask questions as we ran down the basement stairs. They'd clearly been trained for this, and both of them were moving with the same focused urgency their mother had shown. I fumbled with the wall panel for a second before remembering the sequence, and the safe room door clicked open. We piled inside and I locked the heavy deadbolt while my hands shook. Through the tablet showing the camera feeds, I could see Catherine still at the front door talking to the men. One of them was holding up papers that might have been a warrant, but I couldn't see clearly enough to be sure. The other one was looking around the property with his hand resting on something at his hip. Catherine kept shaking her head and pointing at the papers, her body language aggressive and protective. Then more vehicles started arriving, 3 police cars with lights flashing and another dark SUV. Officers in tactical gear were spreading out around the house, and I felt like I was watching a movie instead of the camera feed from a family I babysat for. Finn was sitting on one of the beds with his arms around Iris, both of them quiet but clearly scared. I asked if they knew what was happening, and Finn shook his head, but something in his expression told me he'd been expecting this eventually. He said their mom told them there might be a day when people came asking about their dad, and if that happened, they should go to the safe room and wait until she came to get them. Iris whispered that dad was in trouble but wouldn't tell them what kind. She said they'd had to move 3 times in the past 2 years, and each time mom said it was for dad's work, but she and Finn had heard them arguing about it late at night. I sat down on the other bed and pulled out my phone to call 911, but Finn said we weren't supposed to do that. He pointed to the landline on the wall and said we only used that phone, only called the number mom programmed into it. I picked up the receiver and it automatically dialed, connecting to someone who answered with a security company name I didn't recognize. The woman on the phone asked for my access code, which I didn't have because Catherine had never given me one. I explained who I was, and that Catherine had told me to bring the kids to the safe room because federal agents were at the house. The woman's voice became very crisp and professional, telling me to stay on the line while she contacted Mrs. Caldwell. I could hear typing in the background and other voices having conversations I couldn't make out. She came back and confirmed that the situation was being handled, and I should remain in the safe room with the children until Catherine or Dominic came to get us personally. Nobody else. If anyone else tried to open the door, even someone claiming to be police, I was to refuse and call this number again immediately. She asked if we had everything we needed, and I looked around at the supplies stocked on the shelves. We had enough food and water for several days if necessary, though the thought of being trapped down here that long made my chest tight. I told her we were fine, and she said someone would update me within the hour. On the camera feeds, I watched police officers entering the house now, Catherine standing aside with her arms crossed and her face like stone. They were searching systematically, opening closets and moving furniture and photographing everything. One officer came down to the basement, and I held my breath as he looked around the recreation room, but he didn't seem to notice the hidden door to the safe room. The wall panel was designed to blend in perfectly, and unless you knew exactly where to press, it just looked like part of the finished basement wall. After about 40 minutes, the officers started leaving, carrying boxes of papers and what looked like computer equipment. Catherine was talking to someone who appeared to be in charge, a woman in a navy blazer who kept gesturing at paperwork. I couldn't hear what they were saying through the cameras, but Catherine looked angry and scared in equal measure. Eventually, all the police vehicles left except one, and an officer stayed posted at the front door. The federal agents drove away in their SUVs, and the house became quiet. Another 30 minutes passed before Catherine came down to the basement. I watched her on the camera feed as she walked to the wall panel and pressed her palm against it. The door clicked open and she stepped inside, her face exhausted and older looking than it had been a few hours ago. She sat down heavily on the bed next to Finn and pulled both kids into her arms, holding them tight without saying anything for a long moment. Then she looked at me and said she owed me an explanation. She explained that Dominic had been working as a forensic accountant for the past 15 years, investigating financial crimes and money laundering for various corporations. 2 years ago, he'd uncovered evidence of a massive fraud scheme at a company where he'd been consulting, millions of dollars being funneled through shell corporations and offshore accounts. When he reported it, some very powerful people became very interested in making sure he couldn't testify. There had been threats, incidents that the police called coincidences, but Catherine knew weren't. A car following them for weeks. Their home security system being mysteriously disabled. A break-in at Dominic's office where only his files were taken. Catherine said they'd entered something like witness protection, though not official WITSEC because Dominic hadn't been subpoenaed yet. A private security firm helped them relocate multiple times, setting up new identities and secure housing. The safe room wasn't paranoia. It was a necessary precaution based on credible threats. She'd hoped they were done running, that this house would be their permanent stop, but apparently the investigation had accelerated, and federal agents wanted to bring Dominic in to testify immediately. He was currently in protective custody at an undisclosed location, which is why they'd come to the house looking for him. Catherine had refused to tell them where he was until she could verify everything was legitimate and her family would be protected. The officer still outside was there for our protection, supposedly, though Catherine seemed skeptical about how much actual protection one local cop could provide against people who'd already proven they could find them multiple times. She said we'd need to stay in the house tonight while she figured out next steps, but tomorrow we might need to move again. The kids took this news with a calmness that broke my heart. They'd clearly been through this before, uprooted from schools and friends and homes without warning. Iris asked if they'd be able to finish the school year and Catherine couldn't promise that. Finn wanted to know if Dad was safe and Catherine said yes. He was surrounded by federal agents and in the most secure location possible. I sat there trying to process that I'd somehow ended up in the middle of a situation involving witness protection and federal investigations. I asked Catherine if I should leave, if my being here put them at additional risk, but she shook her head. She said I was already involved now, and honestly she needed the help. She couldn't watch the kids and handle all the security logistics and communicate with Dominic's lawyers at the same time. She'd pay me triple my normal rate for however long this situation lasted, and if I wanted to back out she'd understand completely. But something in her face, the desperation and exhaustion and fear for her children, made it impossible to walk away. I told her I'd stay. That night, we slept in the safe room, all four of us cramped into the small space. Catherine had brought down blankets and pillows, and she set up the tablet to rotate through all the camera feeds. Every hour or so, I'd wake up and see her sitting on the floor watching the screens, her phone in her hand and dark circles under her eyes. The officer outside changed shifts at midnight, a different cop car pulling up and the first one leaving. Catherine watched this on the cameras and made a phone call I couldn't hear, presumably to the security company to verify the shift change was legitimate. I dozed fitfully, waking at every sound, my mind racing with questions I didn't know how to ask. In the morning, Catherine's phone rang at 6 and she answered it immediately. I could only hear her side of the conversation, but it was clear someone was giving her instructions. She said understood multiple times and when and how long. When she hung up, she told us we were leaving in 2 hours and could only bring what fit in one bag each. The next week was a blur of hotels and rental cars and constant movement. Catherine pulled the kids out of school indefinitely, saying she'd homeschool them again until things settled down. The security company had arranged a temporary safe house in a different state, but it would take several days to prepare it. In the meantime, we stayed in cheap motels that only accepted cash, never more than one night in the same place. Catherine paid me in cash too, counting out bills from an envelope that seemed to have an endless supply. The kids did their schoolwork on tablets while we drove from place to place, and I helped quiz them on spelling words and math problems in various motel rooms that all smelled like cleaning chemicals and old carpet. At night, Catherine would make phone calls in the bathroom with the shower running to mask her voice, and I'd stay with Finn and Iris watching TV with the volume up. They never complained or asked when this would be over. They just adapted with a resilience that seemed learned from too much practice. On the 5th day, Catherine got a call that changed her entire demeanor. She stepped outside the motel room to take it, and when she came back in, she was crying. She said Dominic had testified that morning and it went well, better than anyone expected. The defense had tried to discredit him, but his documentation was too thorough and his testimony too detailed. The judge had praised his courage, and the prosecution felt confident they'd secure convictions. More importantly, the main defendant had been denied bail and was in federal custody, which meant the immediate threat level had decreased significantly. Catherine said we could go to the safe house now, a property in rural Montana that was under a different name with no paper trail connecting it to their family. We'd stay there until the trial was over and the defendants were sentenced, probably 3 to 6 months. Then they'd have to decide whether to relocate permanently or try to return to some version of their normal lives. The safe house turned out to be a ranch-style home on 40 acres of nothing. surrounded by mountains and trees with the nearest neighbor 3 miles away. It had the same security features as their previous house, cameras everywhere and reinforced doors and a safe room in the basement, though this one was larger and better stocked. Catherine said the security company owned several properties like this for clients in high-risk situations. We'd have groceries delivered once a week, and no one was to leave the property for any reason. School would be homeschool only, no outside contact. I was welcome to stay and help with the kids, or I could return to my normal life and she'd pay me through the end of the year as a thank you for everything I'd done. The isolation sounded terrifying, but the thought of leaving Finn and Iris felt worse. They'd already lost so much stability, and I'd become a constant in their lives over the past months. I told Catherine I'd stay through the trial. Living in rural Montana was strange and surreal. The kids and I fell into new routines, schoolwork in the mornings, nature walks in the afternoons, and movies in the evenings. Catherine worked remotely, taking video calls in the office and emerging looking stressed but determined. Dominic was still in protective custody somewhere else, and they could only communicate through secure channels monitored by the FBI. Catherine let the kids video chat with him once a week, and both children would cling to the tablet like they could reach through the screen and hug him. Dominic always tried to sound upbeat and normal, asking about their schoolwork and telling them he loved them, but you could see the strain in his face. The trial was scheduled to last 4 months, and we were only 3 weeks into our Montana exile. Time moved slowly when your entire world was 40 acres and the same 4 walls. One evening about a month into our stay, the power went out suddenly. The house generators kicked in after a few seconds, but Catherine immediately became alert in a way that made my stomach drop. She checked the camera feeds on her tablet and saw nothing unusual, no cars approaching or people on the property. But she grabbed her phone and called the security company anyway, reporting the outage and asking them to run diagnostics on the system. While she was on the phone, I heard something outside, maybe an animal or maybe the wind, but it made both kids look at me with wide eyes. Catherine hung up and said the security company was sending someone to check the power lines, but in the meantime, we should go to the safe room just to be cautious. We'd been in Montana for 4 weeks without incident, and I'd started to relax and forget we were actually hiding from dangerous people. The power outage reminded me that the threat was still real. We went down to the basement and Catherine opened the safe room, and this time all 4 of us went inside. The generators meant we still had lights and the camera feeds still worked, but Catherine wasn't taking chances. She locked the deadbolt and settled in to watch the screens while the kids and I played cards on one of the beds. An hour passed, then 2. The security company called back and said their diagnostics showed the power outage was caused by a tree branch falling on a line about a mile from the house. They were sending a repair crew out first thing in the morning, but everything else looked normal. Catherine relaxed slightly but said we should stay in the safe room overnight anyway. The kids fell asleep eventually, and I dozed on and off, waking every time Catherine shifted or her phone buzzed. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up fully and saw her staring at the camera feed from the front driveway with her phone pressed to her ear. She was whispering urgently that she saw a vehicle approaching without headlights, and yes, she was sure it wasn't the repair crew because they weren't coming until morning. On the screen, I could see a dark pickup truck rolling slowly up the driveway, and my heart started hammering. Catherine ended her call and told me to wake the kids quietly. I shook Finn and Iris awake, pressing my finger to my lips when they started to ask questions. Catherine was watching the screen as 2 men got out of the truck, both dressed in dark clothes and carrying what looked like long tools or weapons. I couldn't tell in the darkness. They approached the house slowly, checking windows and looking for entry points. One of them tried the front door and found it locked, then started working on it with something that might have been a crowbar or lockpicking tools. Catherine was on the phone again, giving someone our location and saying we needed immediate help, that 2 armed intruders were breaking into the house. The dispatcher told her police were 20 minutes away given our remote location, and she needed to stay hidden and stay on the line. I pulled both kids against me, and we sat on the floor pressed into the corner farthest from the door. Catherine had turned off the lights in the safe room, so we were watching the camera feeds in near darkness, the screens casting eerie blue light on her face. The men got the front door open and entered the house, moving through rooms methodically. They were looking for something, or someone, and they weren't trying to be quiet anymore. I could hear crashing sounds through the house's structure as they knocked over furniture and opened every door. One of them went upstairs while the other stayed on the main floor, both of them searching with purpose. Then I heard footsteps on the basement stairs and my breath stopped completely. Catherine gripped my shoulder and whispered that the safe room door was soundproof and invisible unless you knew where to look, but we had to be completely silent. One of the men was in the basement recreation room now, and I watched him on the camera feed as he looked around. He walked right past the wall panel that hid our door, so close I could have reached out and touched him if there hadn't been a wall between us. The man pulled out his phone and made a call, and Catherine turned up the volume on the tablet slightly so we could hear what he was saying. His voice was rough and annoyed as he told whoever was on the other end that the house was empty, no signs of anyone here. The person he was talking to said something I couldn't hear, and the man responded that they'd checked everywhere, including the basement. He asked if they should wait for the family to return, and the voice on the phone must have said no, because the man nodded and said they'd clear out. He went back upstairs and met his partner, and they left through the front door they'd broken. Their truck started and drove away down the driveway, and only then did Catherine let out the breath she'd been holding. She kept watching the cameras for another 20 minutes before saying anything, and when police finally arrived with lights blazing, she made them verify their identification through the camera system before she'd let us out of the safe room. The police took statements from Catherine and examined the broken front door and the damage throughout the house. They found tool marks on several windows and evidence that the intruders had been prepared to cut through locks if necessary. Catherine showed them the camera footage of the truck and the two men, and the officers said they'd circulate the images and see if anyone recognized them. But we all knew the chances of catching these people were slim, and even if they were caught, whoever sent them would just send others. Catherine called the security company and said we couldn't stay here anymore. The location had been compromised somehow, and we needed to move immediately. By dawn, we were packing up again, leaving behind the Montana safe house that hadn't been safe after all. The security company arranged a new location, this time in New England, a different house owned by different shell companies with no connection to the previous properties. Catherine said she was starting to feel like they were chess pieces being moved around a board, always reacting and never getting ahead of the threat. The next 3 months passed in a similar pattern. We'd settle into a new location for a few weeks and start to feel almost normal. Then something would happen. A suspicious car on the road, or a strange phone call, or a delivery person who asked too many questions, and Catherine would decide we needed to move again. The kids stopped unpacking completely, just living out of their suitcases because there was no point in pretending we'd stay anywhere permanently. Finn stopped talking about his astronomy books, and Iris stopped checking out library books because we never stayed anywhere long enough to finish them. Both of them became quieter and more withdrawn, and I started to see the real cost of this life on them. They weren't just scared, they were tired, exhausted in a way children shouldn't be. Catherine was slowly falling apart too, losing weight and developing a tremor in her hands from stress and lack of sleep. She'd been strong and controlled at the beginning, but months of running and hiding were breaking down her defenses. The trial finally ended in late spring with guilty verdicts on all counts. The main defendant got 40 years, his partners got sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years, and multiple assets were seized. Dominic's testimony had been the cornerstone of the prosecution's case, and the judge commended him publicly for his courage. Catherine cried when she got the news, months of tension finally releasing. She told the kids their dad would be coming home soon, that we could stop moving and start building a real life again. The security company arranged one final relocation to a city neither Dominic nor Catherine had connections to, a place where they could start fresh with new names and new backgrounds. It wasn't official witness protection, but it functioned the same way. They'd be the Bennett family now, and I'd have to stop calling them by their real names. Dominic would work remotely under a different professional identity. Catherine would continue her data analysis work from home. The kids would enroll in school as Finn and Iris Bennett, and maybe this time they'd be able to make friends and stay long enough to keep them. My job officially ended when they settled into their new house in the new city. Catherine paid me everything she'd promised plus a substantial bonus, enough to pay off all my loans and have savings left over. She thanked me for staying through everything, for protecting her kids and never asking too many questions. She said most people would have walked away after the first incident, but I'd stuck with them through months of chaos and fear. The kids cried when I said goodbye, and I cried too because I'd become attached to them in a way I hadn't expected. They asked if I'd come visit, and Catherine said maybe someday when things were more settled. But we all knew the truth. Clean breaks were safer, no connections to their previous life that could be traced. I hugged them both and told them to be brave and remember they were strong enough to handle anything. Finn whispered that I was the bravest person he'd ever met, and that almost broke me completely. I went back to my normal life, but nothing felt normal anymore. I'd jump at unexpected sounds and check over my shoulder constantly. I couldn't watch the news without thinking about all the things happening behind the scenes that regular people never knew about. I thought about the Caldwells, or the Bennetts, or whoever they were now, and hoped they'd finally found safety. I thought about the safe room in the basement, and how many times we'd had to use it, each time wondering if this was the day something would go truly wrong. I thought about how ordinary their house had looked from the outside, just another family in a nice neighborhood, while inside they were living in constant fear. You never know what's happening in people's lives just by looking at them, what threats they're facing or what measures they're taking to survive. Sometimes the normal-looking house with the perfect lawn has a safe room in the basement, and sometimes you end up using it. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.